Miladina mana, miladina ningimpi nungampi, miladina pakana, pulingana lomi nairi nikatu, miladina pakana. Welcome to my country, the country of my ancestors, Aboriginal land. We acknowledge the Tasmanian Aboriginal community and our elders in particular, all of us who as individuals, families and as a community continue our ancestors' legacy. Mina kani pulingana nina tu, palawakani ti kani mana kani pakana mana mapali. I'm extremely proud to welcome you in Palawakani, the language of Tasmanian Aborigines, the only Aboriginal language now spoken in Lutruwita, Tasmania. Pakana makara miladina mana mapli Lutruwita witi, mapli tipara miladina nika narakupa waranta tunapri pakanangini paliti rala lumi takara kuntana manta ningina kipli lina. We have always been connected to this country. It has always cared for us and we have always cared for it. Aborigines looked after Lutruwita since time began, keeping her healthy for future generations until British invasion. Our history of dispossession means we cannot continue the protection and preservation of country alone. Although we maintain our responsibilities the best we can through land management plans and political campaigns, as well as rekindling spiritual connections and paying respects to country through ceremony, we are pleased that those who value our country are increasingly recognising our ownership and ongoing responsibilities to ensure her protection for the benefit of all residents of Lutruwita and beyond. Together, we need to take urgent action in caring for country against climate change. Nairi Nina Tu. Thank you.
Hi, I'm Ethan, and this is Chloe, and we are the co-conveners of the Launceston School Strike for Climate team.
We're here on Letramarina land, here in so-called Launceston, in Lutruwita, so-called Tasmania. We'd like to acknowledge that sovereignty was never ceded in this country, and therefore we live, work and play on stolen land. We encourage you all to learn more about the First Nations people of the land on which you reside and make an effort to be a good ally. Remember, climate justice can never be achieved without First Nations justice. Therefore, we stand in solidarity with First Nations people from all over the globe.
We're really excited to share our team's project on this global day of action. By being part of this action, you are standing in solidarity and engaging with thousands of other activists just like yourself from all around the world. We are presenting this as a video due to the current pandemic, instead of our normal in-person actions. We're looking forward to taking action in person as soon as we feel it's safe to do so, and we hope to see you there.
We'd like to thank the Tasmanian branch of the Australian Education Union and to all the teachers that are showing this video in their schools, thereby empowering young people and inspiring them to create positive change.
Today, we'll be joined by experts and activists alike. Our sincerest thanks to all of our speakers and Luca, our producer. However, our biggest thanks must go to our amazing team at School Strike for Climate Launceston for their effort, passion, time and energy.
We encourage you to watch this presentation in its entirety. However, you can navigate between the different sections using the timestamps in the video description.
So, without further ado, we are thrilled to present this passion project called Build Our Future, Stories from Tasmania and Beyond. Please enjoy. To start us off, could you just give a brief overview of the basic process of climate change and how you see Australia's main contributions affecting that?
Yeah, look, the basic process is actually pretty simple. It's emission of gases which trap heat in the lower atmosphere. So the main gas is carbon dioxide, but methane is the second most important. And they have the quality that they trap heat which is going out from the surface of the earth and keep it in the lower atmosphere and at the surface. So if you increase the blanket of these gases, you trap more heat, that raises the temperature and so on. Now these gases come almost entirely now from burning fossil fuels, coal, oil and gas. So it's definitely human-driven climate change, and it's due primarily, almost entirely now, to fossil fuels. That's the basic science. Doesn't take a rocket scientist to work that out. So if you look around the world, obviously the big countries are the biggest emitters. That is countries like the United States, China, Russia, and India. But of the 200 countries around Earth, Australia usually ranks about 15th, so 1/5. So we're in the top group of countries. We emit as much temperature more than most European countries like Germany, France, Italy, Britain, so on. But in our exports, in other words, we export a lot of coal and we export liquid natural gas. That puts us at about number 5. So we are a very, very big emitter.
Hey everybody, Toby here. Thank you so much for taking the time out of your day on September 25, the Global Day of Action, to watch this video. If you don't know who I am, I'm a full-time climate justice advocate and activist from the far south of Tasmania, and so excited to be appearing in this video put together by the incredible school students in Launceston, with support from the Australian Education Union in Tasmania as well. As sure of you all know, that climate change sometimes as a young person can feel so overwhelming to even think about, and that's why today is so important, because we're telling the world and our politicians that young people do care and we can take action, and we are listening, we are looking at what they're doing, and we are going to fight back, even if that's in our own classrooms, watching this video and educating ourselves today. COVID-19 has shone a light on so many inequalities in our society, and especially climate change. And a big focus of today in Australia is that we do not want gas as a recovery project for COVID-19. Gas is not sustainable. Gas is not good for our environment. We need a funding model that bounces back our economy and our society with renewable energies, eco-sustainable solutions, but also puts the forefront of our futures in everyone's mind. So thank you all so much. Don't underestimate the power of young people. Keep doing incredible things, and reach out if you ever need any support. There are people all across Tasmania that are ready to support you in whatever action that you want to take or whatever support you might need.
Hi, my name's Fiona and I'm one of the doctors at the Royal Hobart Hospital. And I want to have a chat with you about children's health and how it's impacted by climate change. Climate change has threatened the health gains for the world over the last 50 years. For the future of yourself and all other children across the world, we must understand the risks and take action to provide the health expectations that were promised to you at the United Nations COP21 and the Paris Climate Agreement 2015. Children and young people are most vulnerable when it comes to climate change. The World Health Organization estimates that 88% of the global health burden on climate change will fall to children less than 5 years old. These health risks are compounded by inequalities in society that we're seeing across the world at the moment. Also things like inequalities that lead to poor housing, air pollution, inadequate crops, and no access or limited access to safe drinking water. Extreme weather events that we're seeing across the world can lead to toxic shock in children, and that can impair their development, and it may also alter their gene expression. This then may be passed on to future generations. During severe heat waves, presentations to emergency departments across the globe increase by about 5%, and the proportion of young people that are being affected is disproportionate. Children aged 15 years and under are accounting for 13% of all emergency presentations during heat waves, and children aged 5 years and under account for almost 20%. People attend because of respiratory problems, particularly asthma during extreme heat waves, allergies and mental health issues, including climate anxiety and climate grief. Children are aware that the window of opportunity to act in time to avoid a dramatic climate impacts on the world are closing, and that future of them and all other people across the world, the environment, and animals and plants across the globe are at stake. What could children expect if the world were to achieve, all of the countries across the world were to achieve their COP21 Paris climate agreements? The world would reach net zero carbon emissions by 2050. So if we think about children who are born after 2015, they could expect cleaner air, safer cities, more nutritious food, and enable greater investment in the health systems and the essential infrastructures that are needed for them to have better health impacts. It would also limit the global temperature rise to below 2 degrees and transform the health of children born after and throughout their entire life. Children are innocent victims of climate change, and adults have a duty of care to them, and we should be doing everything possible to understand the threats of climate change and take action immediately. And so that this taking action on climate change will also achieve the co-health benefits associated with it. Thank you.
Hi, my name is Anika Molesworth and I'm joining you from my farm in far western New South Wales. Climate change is a big concern for me. It is a big concern for farmers like me also right around the world, because climate change makes extreme weather events like droughts, floods, bushfires more frequent and more intense. That directly impacts the vegetation we have on our ground, our water resources in our dams and in our rivers. It also impacts the welfare of our animals, like the horses, sheep and goats you can see behind me. And as farmers, we really care about these landscapes that we live in. They are our homes, they are our places of work. We love and nurture them so we can actually produce food to feed people, to feed communities, both here in Australia and around the world. We really need to transition away from harmful fossil fuels that are contributing greenhouse gas emissions to our atmosphere and that are disrupting the climate patterns, like the rainfall patterns and the seasonal conditions that farmers plant their seed to and harvest their crops. We really need renewable energy projects particularly, so we can power our world and our homes and businesses and schools with clean, renewable solar, wind, geothermal, tidal, hydro power. In Australia, we are the sunniest and one of the windiest continents on Earth, so there is huge potential to be utilising clean renewable energy. And actually our chief scientist and our expert community says that Australia is so well positioned to be a powerhouse, a global powerhouse of clean renewable energy. So we have a lot of opportunities there, which is hugely exciting, because not only do they create jobs, but they inject wealth, income into places like here, into rural communities. Obviously, the agricultural industry also plays a very important role in the climate change story. Because we do contribute greenhouse gas emissions, we are one of the most vulnerable and exposed industries to the impacts of climate change. Because farmers live and work so closely with the natural world, we are some of the first to feel the true impacts of these changing weather conditions. But we are also one of the most exciting industries, I think, because we have a real opportunity to actually sequester carbon, to draw down carbon that we've put up into our atmosphere and capture it in vegetation and soils. We're also working with scientists to learn how to reduce emissions produced on farms and in the food systems. That's looking at better feed for our animals, better genetics. It's looking at how do we maintain our vegetation on the ground, because it is so important for our soils, for the moisture in the rivers and in our soils and vegetation, and also for the biodiversity. It's also hugely important for animal welfare issues too. So thank you so much for listening to my story, and all the best to you. We will tackle climate change. We do have a bright future ahead of us, but it's up to you, me, our families and colleagues to be the leaders that we've been waiting for. Thanks so much.
Hi, my name is Taraku Bremel and I'm 12 years old. I live in the land of the Parawa people, Tasmania, Australia.
I'm Zahara Bremel. I'm 9 years old. I live in the lands of the Palawa people, Tasmania, Australia.
Hi, I'm Zara and I'm 8 years old. I'm standing on the land of Palawa people.
I believe that climate justice is our survival. It is to ensure that not only my generation but the next generation has a bright future, to save a plentiful amount of animals that would instead be dead from loss of habitat and heating temperature.
I'm worried about the future of all people and animals on the planet, If we don't act now to change how we are polluting and changing the environment, we won't have a planet to live on. I'm going to recycle more and try to use less single-use plastic.
I recycle myself plastic for the environment so that animals don't get sick, and I go to climate strikes with my mum.
My name's Lucy. I live on the lands of the Munnings people in La Truita, so-called Tasmania. I care about climate justice because I want to see the elimination of social injustices and racial injustices, and I want to see a world where we're all equal and we look after our earth in the most sustainable and environmentally friendly way.
Hi, I'm Olivia and this is Toby, and we're two Year 12 students at Launceston College. We're currently on the Launceston School Strike for Climate Board.
We are currently on the land of the Palawa and Pakana people, and climate justice is important to us because we want a safe future for future generations.
Hi everyone, my name's Mia.
Hi, this is Bella and I'm Maddie.
I'm a 20-year-old uni student from the Melakoti Nation, or the so-called Huon Valley.
We're Year 11 students from Lenarumarino land here in so-called Launceston.
It's really important that we talk about climate justice because big companies, big polluters and governments need to be held accountable for their actions and contributions to the climate crisis. The climate crisis is affecting people disproportionately on the front lines who have emitted the least and are feeling the effects the worst.
I care about climate justice because I believe in a just transition and that no one should be left behind. I'm doing my bit to stop the climate crisis by writing to my MP about my concerns, attending strikes and educating myself more about the crisis and what I can do.
Hi guys, my name's Addison and I'm a School Strike for Climate Launceston branch climate activist and I'm 17.
Hi, I'm Lily, I'm in grade 11 and I'm a member of the School Strike for Climate Launceston team.
Hi, my name's Will, I'm from Lutruwita land in Tasmania, and climate justice is important to me because for so long we have called this world our home. It has nurtured us, cared for us and supported us, and now we are situated at a very pivotal time in history. We, as the human race, are exploiting our earth of its resources and beauty to sustain our harmful ways of life. But this does not have to be the case. And furthermore, from it being an environmental issue, it's also a social issue. The repercussions that climate change possess are astronomical. Communities everywhere will be afflicted, especially those in impoverished nations. That is why I believe in standing up and fighting for change.
Hello from beautiful Lutruwita, Tasmania, the home of the world's first Green Party and 100% renewable energy by 2022. Climate justice for me is a way to connect with and learn from like-minded and passionate individuals who see the world through similar eyes to me. It's about giving voice to the voiceless, the helpless plants and animal species, and the indigenous peoples who will feel the brute force of climate change before we ever do. Finally, it's about effecting real change in the real world with real actions and accomplishments. Thousands of individual projects and commitments can lead to a cascading effect of change on a global scale.
G'day, my name's Ingrid Albion. I'm an environmental educator here in Tasmania, and for the last 30 years I've been working on all sorts of environmental education, messaging to teach people about the environment and how they can care for it. And last year I travelled down to Antarctica as part of a Homeward Bound journey with 100 other women from all around the world. There was 2 of us from Tassie, and I brought along my friend Tassie the Devil, and she came down to meet all the penguins. But the real reason we went down there was because we wanted to make a difference about climate change, because climate change is the biggest thing that is affecting the planet today. And we've seen the impacts. While we were down in Antarctica, over 12 million hectares burnt in Australia in bushfires. Those sort of fires had never been seen before. Normally in a fire season we'd see 1/3 of a million hectares burnt. So this is a lot that we're talking about. It's a big difference, and these differences are due to climate change, and you probably all know that because you're all learning about the science. And it's really important that we start to act on this with great determination. And I'm excited for you kids as students to learn the science, because we need more scientifically savvy leaders. You know, we've seen what's been happening with COVID-19, and that's brought us in touch with a reality that we are connected to nature, and it's important that we do think about that connection and what we can do to sustain this planet for the future and for future generations. So we need leaders, we need those voices, we need to hear more scientific voices, and we need to hear the voice for the planet. And I'm hoping that what you guys learn in these few videos give you opportunities or thoughts about how you can make that difference, how you can inspire others to make a difference on your behalf, because we're all relying on this planet and we all need to do our part. Older people, younger people, men, women, children, we've all got a part to play in this. And I think the part that the kids have been playing these days is fantastic. It's inspiring. So thank you.
When I was a first-year medical student, leading medical journal The Lancet published a report stating that climate change was the biggest threat to our health in this century. But it wasn't until I became a parent 10 years later that this fact really hit home for me on a personal level. I attended the first School Strike for Climate rally in Hobart with my baby strapped to my chest, and I was inspired by the crowd of young faces standing up and calling for justice for the sake of their futures. More and more, this statement that I first heard in The Lancet as a young student is becoming less of a future prediction and more of a reality that we are facing today. We are seeing an increase in the frequency and severity of extreme weather events, disruption to our food and water security, increasing air pollution, and human displacement due to climate change. This is how climate change acts as a threat multiplier, exacerbating the biological and social risk factors that underpin disease and result in conflict and poorer mental health. For example, we have witnessed how climate change is causing longer and more severe bushfire conditions in Australia. This, along with the burning of fossil fuels, pollutes the air that we breathe. Exposure to air pollution causes an increase in conditions like asthma and other respiratory diseases, but also things like stroke, heart disease, diabetes, and low birth weights in babies, just to name a few. School strikers, please know that you are not alone. Doctors and health professionals around Australia and the world are supporting you. The Australian Medical Association, along with many of our specialist colleges, has declared climate change a health emergency. And they, along with Doctors for the Environment, are working hard behind the scenes to advocate for a healthier future. We need our government to invest in our health. We cannot accept continued investment in the fossil fuel industry that harms our health and is leading us towards an unsafe climate. We have seen how our government has listened to the health experts and acted dramatically to curtail the COVID-19 pandemic, saving thousands of lives. We need the same level of urgency from our government to tackle the climate crisis. And the good news is that acting on climate change doesn't involve isolating ourselves from our friends and families or hurt the economy. It improves our health by cleaning up our air, regenerates our natural places, and supports our Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples who are at the forefront of this fight. So, from everyone here at Doctors for the Environment, know we stand with you and keep up the great work.
Hello, I'm Clothilde Langlais. I'm a physical oceanographer and I study the ocean. So with climate warming, the ocean are warming and the water around Tasmania are heating up a lot. There's a long time series of observation offshore of Maria Island, and over the last 70 years the water over there are warmed up of more than 1.4 degrees. So, it's quite a lot. And this warming is due to ocean warming due to climate change, but also to change of circulation due to climate change. So we've got more water from the East Australian current reaching our coast in Tasmania. And large eddies are bringing all this heat all the way down to the southern tip of Tasmania. With it, this warm water are also full of invasive species from the mainland. So we've got this invasion of long-spined urchin coming with the current. And in the last 20 years, there's been more and more of these species coming to our shore. And the endemic species of Tasmania can't go further south because it's then just the Southern Ocean and Antarctica. So offshore of St. Helens, now 40% of the ecosystem is made of the barren from the sea urchin. So there's a big loss in kelp forest. And the kelp forest in particular, took a toll on the change of climate in Tasmania. We've lost 95% of the giant kelp forest, and there's just a remaining 5% scattered around the coast that is just trying to survive the warm water. So all this is really due to climate change.
Hi, my name's Kirstin. I'm a co-founder and managing director at Future Super. I'm speaking to you from Gadigal land, and I acknowledge elders past, present and emerging, and that their sovereignty was never ceded. For those of you who don't know, superannuation is that portion of your wages that's kept aside for you to spend when you retire. And I know that sounds boring, but it's not. Australians collectively have almost $3 trillion in superannuation. And to put that into perspective, that's enough to fully fund our transition to a renewable energy economy 10 times over. Once you start working, a chunk of that $3 trillion will belong to you, and you can decide how it's invested. Currently in Australia, only about 12% of super funds actually even tell their members what they invest in. And for those that don't, you can bet it's not a good story. Super funds in Australia are heavily invested in fossil fuels, in companies that have exploitative labour practices, in old growth logging, armaments, alcohol, tobacco and gaming. It's the big dirty secret of the superannuation industry. But at Future Super, we aim to do things differently. We provide members with an opportunity to make sure that their superannuation money is invested in line with their values, so that the future that exists by the time you're old enough to spend that money is one that's free from climate change and inequality.
Don't let the Tarkan go the way of the tiger. You know the Tarkan's too precious to mine. Too many creatures depend on the Tarkan. Too many forests have already been mined. Well, you know there's nowhere else like it on earth. You know one there is too precious to lose. These rivers are the purest you'd ever dip your toes in. These forests we just can't afford to lose. Don't let the Tarkan go the way of the tiger. You know the Tarkan's too precious to mine. Too many creatures depend on the Tarkan. Too many forests have already been mined. Well, these days you can travel the world in a heartbeat with pictures at your fingertips. But if you ever want to dance in the shade and the cool of a waterfall and listen to the silence and the symphony, don't let the Tarkan go the way of the tiger. You know the Tarkan's too precious to mine. Too many creatures depend on the Tarkan. Too many forests have already been mined.
To all of our younger viewers, this might be a time to hop off your screens now. Have a think about all the information you've just heard and make a plan of what you're going to do next.
This could be writing a letter to your MP, making a sign, taking some photos, getting out in nature, having a conversation with the adults in your life about how they can invest positively in your future. It could be reducing waste at home and school, organising a cleanup, volunteering, or even just taking the time to learn some more. Remember, this video will remain accessible on YouTube so you can watch it again with friends or family at any time.
Feel free to keep watching if you're still interested in some of the amazing speakers that we have remaining. The issues might be a little bit more complicated though. Thanks again for joining us. We can't wait to hear about the changes that you've made.
Yar Pulingana, Mina Yar Pulingana Nina, Yar Pulingana Nohina.
Greetings, I welcome you to the land of the good spirits, and Tawana, Tasmania, my clans of my old people who lived on this beautiful country, who gathered food, materials to make humpies and hunted on the vast plains surrounding Tasmania. And today we are continuing our culture that is passed down through generation to generation. I acknowledge my ancestors and pay respect to their descendants, my elders, and to all generations of Tasmanian Aboriginals who are watching, and welcome you all to School Strike's Build Our Future online event. On this land, my people live and celebrated our culture beneath the stars. Here, where many of our nations met, traded and celebrated seasonally, hunting and harvesting, bonds of kinship, marriage and our shared living traditions. Our ancestors travelled great distances throughout this land, Tawana, the sun, the moon and stars guiding their journey, giving us stories of our coming into being as a people, of our place on this country and our responsibility to look after its flora and fauna. As you are gathered for this event, close your eyes and your mind. Imagine this place in my ancestors' time, the songs and language deep in culture that we are working to recover for future generations, that they too might continue our respectful connections to country. I hope you all continue to walk this journey with me side by side as one people, with diverse cultures, and build upon the relationships my old people trusted with our forebearers, and continue to be friends. Nari Nina too, thank you, Wulika.
G'day, my name is Nick Towle. I'm a doctor trained in Tasmania, worked for about 10 years in emergency medicine and now teaching medical students, so future doctors. So thank you for the opportunity to present to you today. And I'd like to run through a little bit around climate change, its impacts on health and what we can do about it. So to do that, I've got a few slides to share. So many years ago in the Lancet, a medical journal, it was identified that climate change is actually a health challenge and a health threat, not just an environmental problem. And we see this in many ways that are direct and indirect. So we know the consequence of major events like major flooding, bushfires and so on can have impacts in terms of direct loss of life, damage to infrastructure and the like. And not only damage to infrastructure, but coming at an incredible cost. So diverting money away from essential services such as health when we try to clean up the damage. So trying to prevent the worst impacts of climate change is really important. We've seen that some of the direct threats in terms of increased bushfire risk, and this last summer in Australia has certainly been a testament to that. Major bushfires, sadly with loss of life and damage to a lot of property. But Tasmania is not immune, and that's important. So Denali bushfires, 2013, thankfully no loss of life, but certainly a big upheaval to people's way of life. And we shouldn't be complacent about some of the risks. There are also many indirect effects, and some of those include the effects of heat on people's health, and particularly older people who maybe have other health conditions are particularly vulnerable when the temperature increases. An example of that, many years, the tragic Black Saturday bushfires. Now people are aware of the direct loss of life, 173 lives lost directly, but a whole lot more were lost due to the heat wave that accompanied that time. And so this little chart here, the blue line is the number of people who normally die in that period. The red line is actually the number of extra people who died because of the intense heat that was experienced across Victoria. But it's not just older people, and we've got to remember that even if you're young, but you maybe have other conditions, hay fever, asthma, and so on, climate change also can make some of those conditions worse. And we've seen in Tasmania important research showing that as the heat goes up, the number of presentations to emergency increase, so putting a lot of strain on our health system. Now, when you put all of this together, it can actually be quite a pessimistic sort of vision of the future. But I want to say that we can actually be quite optimistic, because the actions that we can take to address climate change are also the things that we can do to improve our health. I'm part of a national network of many hundreds of doctors and medical students coming together to tackle the climate crisis and other major threats to our health. And we've seen with COVID-19 that political leaders can get behind health professionals in making big changes to look after our health. Where to start? It's important that we stop investing in things that are actually doing damage to our health. So talking to parents, talking to schools about taking investment away from the things that are damaging, so such as coal, oil and gas, but putting that money into good things, renewable energy, better transport, better housing, things like that. And certainly the doctors of the future are well onto this and being really conscious about the way that they invest, who they bank with, who they have superannuation with. So a lot of choices in life where we can actually make a difference. There are other things you can do much more locally. So planting trees, planting vegetation around buildings really helps to reduce the increase in heat that it's experienced. And you can see here, if you're planting fruit, bushes or trees, you get an added bonus for health. A number of my students really actively engaged in what are the things we can do, big and small. And so here they've created a worm farm, and what they're doing is they're diverting food waste from landfill. Food waste going into landfill produces a lot of methane, a potent greenhouse gas. And so by having a compost or a worm farm, they're actually making a difference. And the students are right behind you. So these are a number of my students. They're going to graduate this year as doctors, and they're right there with you. They're standing beside you in tackling this challenge. But it's also important to continue to think about all the things that you can do to be looking after your health. Staying healthy and well for as long as possible is really important as we learn to adapt to some of the climate change. Advocating for things such as active transport, better cycleways, better walkways and so on to get to school or to shops. That's another important part of reducing our emissions and helping you to stay healthy and all of us to stay healthy. And really the take-home message is that actions to address climate change and reduce emissions are also the things that we can be doing to stay healthy and well and have a better future for everyone. We don't need to fight about the science of climate change, because the solutions to climate change are the things that will make for a better life. Thanks for listening.
I think if anyone can look around Australia, they can see, and indeed the world, they just see these changes. And something that we know that you have an interest in and that has come up in the media recently is the concept of climate tipping points. Could you just sort of explain what these are and if you believe that they're impacting us or that there are some examples of them?
Yeah, basically tipping points are what we call non-linearities in the climate system. Now we use the word linear, and that's what most of life is about. If you put pressure on a system, if you increase the pressure, the system responds in an increasing way. And that's fairly normal for much of the environment and so on. But when you really force a system hard, sometimes you can cause it to tip rather abruptly. And a good analogy of that is when you're out on a lake or the sea in a kayak, and you tip the kayak a little bit and it comes back, and you tip it a little bit more and it comes back. But if you tip it too much, in other words, if you put too much pressure on, it flips and you can't stop in between. So what are some examples of tipping points in the Earth? They come in three types. One are the big polar ice, the North and South Pole. Another one are circulation systems like the ocean circulation in the Atlantic or the atmospheric circulation. ENSO would be a good example of that, El Nino, Southern Oscillation. And then there are large ecosystems that we call biomes, like the Amazon forest or the big forest around the Northern Hemisphere in Siberia and Canada. So let me give you an example of how one works. And that is the ice that floats on the Arctic Ocean. That's over the North Pole. That's really important because it's sun 24 hours a day. But that ice over the ocean reflects the sunlight back. And so that means it tends to cool that part of the Earth. But now, as the planet is warming, that ice is shrinking in the summertime. So what happens is now when it gets full sunlight, there is more dark ocean water exposed. That actually absorbs more sunlight. That increases the heating, and that causes the ice to shrink even more. So you can see this feedback loop. By the more it shrinks, the hotter it gets, the more it shrinks, and so on. So you get a point of no return where we could stabilize the temperature, our temperature of the Earth as a whole, but that system would unravel. We think we're close to that tipping point, and we'll probably cross it this decade, which means that we will lose all of that ice in the summertime. And another example is the Amazon forest, that beautiful, huge rainforest, biggest forest on Earth. And what's important there is, as the name indicates, it has to keep getting rain. And it gets about half of its rain internally. In other words, the trees evaporate moisture, goes up, condenses in clouds, and comes back down. The other half comes in from the Atlantic Ocean in weather fronts. Both of those are changing because of human deforestation. You're getting less evaporation and less recycling of water. But as the climate warms, you're getting less moisture coming in off the Atlantic Ocean, and that's because the Atlantic Ocean circulation is changing. So there's a double whammy on the Amazon forest. It's losing rain from internal recycling, it's losing rain from the Atlantic Ocean. Once it hits a critical point, it'll start burning and retreating, which means even less evaporation, and it'll burn even more, and you can see the tipping point working. So that's basically how they work. They all have certain levels of pressure, temperature increases, levels of deforestation. And we can identify about 10 or 12 of these around the Earth that we think are in danger of tipping this century. Now, the last comment I'll make is just like a row of dominoes, when you start tipping one or two of those, they can start helping others tip, and you get this cascade of tipping points. And that's the bottom line. If we get those tipping cascades started, we won't be able to stop them, and the Earth is going to move to a much different state, even if we humans decide to get emissions down. That is the big danger of what we face.
Well, hello, my name is Matt King. I'm from the University of Tasmania, where I'm Professor in Geography and Spatial Sciences, and I'm an expert in what is happening in the polar regions and its effect on sea level. Now, when I was at school and uni, scientists didn't know what was happening to the great ice sheets of Greenland and Antarctica. We didn't even know if they were growing or shrinking. Even as recently as 10 years ago, there was no agreement about what was happening in the polar regions. But that's all changed now. Around 2010, NASA and the European Space Agency pulled together an international team of scientists to work out what was going on. And I was one of those people pulled into that team. And the good news is that thanks to satellites, we're no longer in the dark. We now know, we're eyewitnesses, in fact, to the events that are going on right in the polar regions. And I want to tell you the news. It is bad news, but there is also hope. We know that Greenland is losing more ice than is replaced by snow by about 200 billion tonnes per year. 200 billion tonnes of ice pushed into the ocean each year that's not replaced by snow. Antarctica adds another 50%, another 100 billion tonnes per year. There are glaciers in Antarctica that are bigger than our largest cities and taller than our tallest mountain here in Australia. And some of them are about to enter, or maybe already have entered, an irreversible retreat. A retreat that can't be stopped even if we cool the climate again. If you add to the ice on land the ice that's floating in the ocean, which has a tremendous effect on the world's climate in its own right, then 28 trillion tonnes of ice has disappeared from Earth in the last 26 years. 28 trillion tonnes. That's about the weight of your family car in ice every second day. Not just for each of you, but for every one of the 7 billion other people on this planet. But that's not the worst news, though. The worst news is that Antarctica doesn't stay in Antarctica, and Greenland doesn't stay in Greenland. It ends up on our beloved coasts and beaches, and crossing our roads and flooding our homes. It's going to visit the rich here in Australia, as well as the poor in the Pacific Islands, Bangladesh and Indonesia. You see, climate doesn't discriminate, does it? It doesn't only come to bite those who emitted the most greenhouse gases, it bites everyone. And perhaps it bites the poorest the hardest, the tens of millions who are vulnerable to just a few centimetres of sea level rise. Every centimetre of sea level rise adds another 1 million people into the group who will be profoundly affected by it. Every thumb width, if you like, of sea level rise is 1 million people whose homes and jobs are possibly washed away. The rich of Australia, I've got no doubt, will adapt, but for the rest, it just compounds the inequality and the poverty, layering it on top of what exists there already. Now, we know that there's already 30 centimetres of sea level rise baked into the climate system, as much as we've warmed it already by the year 2100. But we also know that if we warm the climate even further, it could be 100 centimetres by 2100, by the time you've got grandkids. But we also know that it doesn't need to be 100 centimetres. The choices we all make now, from the solar panels on your roof to the government shifting to renewable energy and electric vehicles, those choices will determine the rate at which things change and will buy time for people to adapt. And it will determine not just sea level rise, but all sorts of things. Bushfires here in Tassie will be 8 times more risky thanks to climate change. Twice as dangerous, twice the area, twice as often. Now here's the good news. We know that your parents and carers listen to you. You have a powerful voice. Talk to them about climate change. Catch the bus or train rather than drive. Write to your MPs, get your parents and carers to write to their MPs. Your voices can make a difference. Keep going. There is hope.
Hi everyone, my name's Rachel Hay and I volunteer with Fossil Free UTAS. We aim to get UTAS and also the more general community to divest from fossil fuels because we think this is a really good way to address climate change, trying to stop it through taking away the money that fossil fuel companies have to pollute the atmosphere, and also taking away the social license and approval that they have from people to do that. So we advocate for divestment from fossil fuels, and that means that people stop investing in companies like BP. It could also mean that they divest from companies like the ANZ Bank, if the ANZ Bank was to lend to the fossil fuel industry. It could also mean divesting from companies like Simon's, if they were to help like a coal mine like Adani get off the ground. So we've been trying to do this at UTAS since about 2014. Initially started doing things like petitions, trying to meet with the university, talking to the media, having stalls on campus, having rallies on campus, just trying to get the message out there and try to start a conversation. But that didn't really work. So we tried more direct tactics, which included a tent city outside the front of the Vice-Chancellor's office and having a sit-in his office, as well as one of our volunteers scaling one of the buildings and putting a big banner up on campus. And that did result in them meeting with us. And from that, they agreed that they would not divest, but would go carbon neutral. So that means that they would try to reduce the carbon in their operations, but what they couldn't reduce, they would offset by buying carbon credits, which, so for example, like we might produce carbon by driving a car from Sandy Bay to the city, but somewhere else they might plant some more trees which aim to suck that carbon out of the atmosphere. So that didn't happen straight away. So for a couple of years we aimed at advocating for UTAS to go carbon neutral and to divest. We had a public forum, petitions again, meetings on campus, and meetings with the university administration. And then once they did go carbon neutral, we kind of celebrated that and used that message to say, well, UTAS as researchers do the research so that climate change is real. UTAS promotes itself as a clean university and it's began actually doing that by going carbon neutral, we need to take the next step and divest. So in that meantime, we got a new Vice-Chancellor who was much more receptive to having conversations with us. And we had meetings where we showed him reports that we'd written about the ethical case for divestment and the financial case for divestment. And that, along with the public pressure that we kind of created, eventually won him over to getting rid of direct investments in fossil fuels, which is like, so UTAS itself might invest in BP. So they've got rid of all of that, which was about, I think, $2 million in fossil fuels. But they still have about $40 million in indirect investments in fossil fuels. So that means that they have a fund manager and that fund manager invests for them in fossil fuels. So we're still advocating to get that money out of fossil fuels. So still meeting with the Vice-Chancellor, organising events on campus, having banners that we put out on campus and get media attention and talking to different people in the university to try and leverage that. And I think our story has been a really positive one. Like, we've had a lot of success along the way and we're in a good position now where I feel like it's really possible for us to get the change that we've been pushing for, which is really nice to see, because often we just focus on the fact that the government's not doing a lot and a lot of negatives, but yeah, it's really good to see a positive. So I'd really encourage all of you guys to talk about divesting with your family, people that you work for, your schools, and your friends as well. So, for example, you can divest Dolomites. The Commonwealth Bank got a lot of us in with the Dolomites campaign, but they invest in fossil fuels. So if you change banks from Commonwealth to another bank, you can look online. There's lots of them that don't give to fossil fuels. That's a really good way that you yourself can divest. And you can talk to your parents about the banks that they're with, the banks that they might have loans with as well. And obviously, the people that we work for in our schools might have a lot more money than us. So it could be really good to talk to them about where their money is invested. So you might want to do things like writing letters to them, organising to have meetings, putting forward your case for why you think they need to divest from fossil fuels. So the seriousness of climate change and how it's going to affect our future, and also the financial case. So the fact that fossil fuel investments are going to be stranded assets in a couple of years, and then it's not any more economically viable to have investments in renewables. It's better to have investments in renewables than it is to have it in fossil fuels. So there's a lot of good ways which you can convince them to do that. And I'd really encourage you to do that.
So despite recent government announcements, what would your ideal future for Australia be, or what do you think Australia's priority should be coming out of the coronavirus pandemic, but also just generally into the future?
Yeah, I think we need to set some very, very ambitious but yet achievable targets. Our first target should be 2030, 10 years out, and we should try to get just as many emissions out of our economy as we possibly can. But at a minimum, we must cut them in half. We must get 50% emissions down. And that's consistent with the upper Paris Agreement target. I don't think we're going to make 1.5. I think past inaction has cost us that one. But we can make well below 2, which is, I take as about 1.8. But we can only do that if we get half of our emissions out by 2030 and we get the rest of them out by 2040. So when you hear people talk about net zero by 2050, that's too late. We need to hit net zero by 2040 at the latest. Now, the reason I'm somewhat optimistic is that we can actually do this, because if we get carbon out of our electricity system, which is possible in 10 years, you can roll out renewables that fast, we will reduce our emissions by about 35% or so. And then when you look at increasing efficiencies in other sectors, like starting to use electric vehicles, making more efficient agriculture, the next lot of buildings, we make them much better insulated, you can get the other 15% out of that. So yes, we can do it, but the point is we cannot delay now. Every year that we don't do anything matters.
Thank Thank you so much for that, particularly given this Day of Action's theme being Build Our Future. It's so important to hear the opinions of experts such as yourself, not only on the climate science, but also how that science should implement and impact our policy decisions. So thank you so much for that insight.
Hi, my name is Seth. I'm a GP and a mum. I'm speaking to you today from Nipaluna, Hobart, on the land of the Munnings people. I'm passionate about the need for urgent climate action and also for the need to look after our mental health and well-being in the face of this challenge. It can bring up a lot of strong feelings when we start to really understand the reality of climate change. It's very normal to feel worried or scared. You might feel deeply sad, despairing, overwhelmed. You may feel frustrated and angry. You might even feel like the situation is hopeless and nothing you or anyone else can do can change that. All of this is understandable. The situation is serious and urgent. A lot of terrible things have happened and continue to happen to lead us to this place. It would actually be more unusual to hear all of this and not feel any painful emotions. I'm certainly not here to tell you that what you're feeling is wrong. I'm not here to tell you not to worry or not to be angry. I'm here to say that I feel that way too, as do literally millions of people around the world. You're never alone with this. The challenge is, how do we find the courage to do what's right in the face of all this? Not to just switch off, turn away, and hope that it'll somehow work out for the best, or just decide that it's a lost cause and give up. How do we keep going when we meet resistance, or what can seem like willful ignorance, unchecked greed, or just plain lack of respect for humanity and the planet? How do we hold on to hope when the future is far from certain? It isn't easy, but here you are. I certainly don't have all the answers, but I do have some ideas that you might find helpful. Firstly, build a network of support around you. Connect to others who share your concerns and values. Amplify and lift each other up in relationships which are mutually supportive. Talk to the people in your life about why acting on climate change is so important to you, and ask them to support you. If they can't or won't support you, then try to find people who can. Remember that you can talk to your GP, school counsellor, or any mental health professional about this too. Secondly, get personal with nature. We've developed this weird idea that we're somehow separate from nature. Lots of aspects of our lives maintain this illusion, though Indigenous cultures around the world have never lost sight of our connection to this whole shared life of the planet. It's a deep connection we can feel in our heart if we're willing to tune into it. Take a moment today to go outside and pause. Breathe in, breathe out, feel the breeze on your skin, feel the ground beneath your feet. There is no separation. We are part of this great web of life we are striving to protect. In fact, we are entirely dependent on it. When we take action to look after Earth, we also nurture ourselves. And when we take the time to look after our own well-being, we also care for Earth. Care for self is care for planet, and vice versa. Just as we now know we can't take and take from the Earth and still expect it to function, the same is true of us. As we work together to build a sustainable world around us, let's also build that inside of us. Refuse to get used up and worn out like so many of the Earth's resources. Take rest when you need it. Switch off when you need a break. Nothing in nature is on the go all the time. Show the same compassion to yourself that you do for the world. Be deeply grateful to Earth and all it provides for you. And likewise, acknowledge every action you take, no matter how small, that goes towards making the world a better, kinder place. Thirdly, it helps to see the big picture. Humans have overcome incredible adversity and difficulties in the past through our collective effort and determination, and we'll get through our current challenges too. Millions of people around the world have made it their life's work to create a better future. People everywhere are doing their part, big or small, and it all adds up. You don't have to save the world single-handed. You just do what you can with what you have today, but do not underestimate your power. You might not see it straight away. It might be some small thing, a conversation or simple action, but it starts a cascade of change that flows through others. The future is not yet written, and we cannot know for sure what will happen. We can listen to the message our feelings have to tell us about the state of the world, and choose not to push them away, but accept them. Learn skills and access the support that we need to respond in ways that matter. True courage is doing what you know to be right, even though you cannot be certain of the outcome, because standing by is unacceptable. It's a bold and radical thing to do, but we can do it together. Let's start by building kindness and compassion for ourselves and extend that vision to include the whole planet. Thank you.
Do you see the ways that we've grown apart? I don't like it at all. Do you see the ways that we've gone too far, drifting off of our course? Do you see the ways that we've let plastic cover the ocean like snow? The snow, it always melts with the seasons changing. The summer's helping, one's cold water, one was oil before. Oh, how much is left to burn? Lately I've been worried, I don't know where to it is that I do belong. Lately I've been too busy to smell the bottle brushes chasing laps around the sun. And I've sat here and cried, so running from my eyes, just wondering how the fuck will I end up with you? And you just laugh and smile, shake your head and remind me that all good things can come true. Oh, how much there's left to learn. Do you see the ways that we've gone too far? We need now more than ever before to come together, put our differences apart, stop drifting off of our course. And do you see the ways that we need our reef just like our trees along the shore? And if it knows to help, we're half of what we breathe in for ourselves is out of sight and on the ocean floor. Oh, how much is left to learn? Lately I've been worried, I don't know where to it is that I do belong. Lately I've been too busy to smell the bottle brushes chasing laps around the sun. And I've sat here and cried, so running from my eyes, just wondering how the fuck will I end up with you? You just laugh and smile, shake your head and remind me that all good things can come true. Oh, how much is left to learn? I say, whoa, how much is left to learn?
Thank you so much for taking the time out of your day and making a conscious decision to educate yourself about issues that are not only important to you, will affect all of our futures. It's important to realise that we are standing at a pivotal point in history, and by engaging today, you are helping in establishing a more sustainable and more just future for the generations to come.
We hope that you feel inspired to conduct your own actions. This might be writing a letter to your MP, making a sign, taking some photos, getting out in nature, having a conversation with the adults in your life about how they're investing positively into your future, and perhaps making plans for your own investment. It could be reducing waste at home or at school, organising a cleanup, volunteering, or even just taking the time to learn more. Remember, this video will remain accessible on YouTube so you can watch it again at any given time.
A great action if you are inspired, passionate, and want to learn more about being a change maker in your local community and beyond is considering joining your local School Strike for Climate hub, or even starting one if there doesn't happen to be one near you. Let your teachers know, and they can make contact with us through their Australian Education Union Tasmanian branch connections, or message a School Strike for Climate Facebook page for the group that's closest to you. We would love so much to have you on board.
Thank you again to the AEU for your support and to all our speakers. It's been an honour to work with you, and we look forward to doing so again in the future. Thanks for watching.